Many years ago, I used to live in town of Lahaina on Maui, and Lahaina had been known 150 or so years ago as a pretty wild town. It was the center of the world whaling industry at one point, and so it got an awful lot of ships and wild sailors and wild drinking and had quite a reputation. So a lot of the modern tourist shops would play that up because, it sells pretty well. And they would play up piracy, even though there had never been pirates there, because, well, pirates are pretty popular these days. And so there was a T-shirt that originated in Lahaina, although I've seen it in a lot of other places since, that showed a pirate on it, and it said, "The beatings will continue until morale improves." I think of that when I read this story about throwing this guy in jail until he can pay his debt, because I'm going, did they stop and think about what they were doing? I mean, that's so stupid, right? We'll throw you in jail where you can't earn any money until you've earned enough money to... Yeah, it doesn't work. And it reminds us, perhaps in a roundabout way, that there's difficulties whenever we tackle this whole issue of forgiveness. Mackenzie read the wonderful story from Exodus about the people passing through the Sea of Reeds to freedom. And there's a story that the ancient rabbis would tell, which is really intriguing, because we know this story, right, from Passover, and we read it a number of times throughout the years in church. It's an important story. It's part of our heritage. And the way it's presented in Exodus, it's a real classic, God's on our side, God whumps the bad guys kind of story, the way it's presented. The ancient rabbis, in talking about this story, thought a little bit more about it. And so they would tell a story that God looked down and saw the angels dancing in celebration when the people got to freedom. And God told the angels to stop dancing and said, "Yes, you can rejoice that I have brought my people to freedom, but I also want you to recognize that in the process, others of my children have died." Such an important reminder to us that, when you've got winners, often you also have losers. And maybe it's an important part of the process for those of us at those times when we feel like we're on the winning side, not to stand up and go, "Nee." Tempting though it might be sometimes. Because when some win, some often lose. Now, I want to share an illustration. Usually, whenever I share illustrations about elected people or politicians, they're either in office or they've just been chucked out of office. I usually try not to tell stories about people who are running for anything because I do not want it to look like an endorsement. So this is not an endorsement, just a story, but I couldn't pass it up. It's been pretty viral this week. You might have seen this on the internet. It's a story concerning Schmidt, who's running for the leadership of the federal NDP. And Singh was at a meet and greet event, and there was a woman hassling him. And what became significant is someone grabbed their phone and videotaped it. Otherwise, it would undoubtedly have gotten forgotten. But this woman would not get away from being in front of him. Now, he was substantially taller. And the angle of the camera is interesting because you can always see the woman, but you can always see him behind her. She couldn't block him. But as he would move, she would move, and she would not get out of his face, and she kept screaming at him, saying, "You're going to bring in Sharia law. You're part of the Muslim Brotherhood." Now, of course, the Muslim Brotherhood, obviously, is a part of Islam. Sharia law is also a Muslim practice. Jagmeet Singh is Sikh. Thank you for laughing. Sometimes people don't notice that off the bat, and they're going, "Well, Sikhs, Muslims, they're the same." And of course, they're not. They're completely different faiths, completely different continents, basically, that those two are dominant religions from, certainly hundreds and hundreds of miles apart. But what's interesting is Singh's response repeatedly was to say, "You're welcome here, ma'am. We love you. You're welcome here. I disagree with you, but you are welcome. You're welcome." And afterwards, his supporters took him aside and they were like, You blew it. You should have said, hold on, lady, I'm not Muslim, I'm Sikh. And he said, no, I couldn't do that because that would have legitimized her anger and her racism. It basically would have said to her, because I'm Sikh, you shouldn't say that. But by extension, if I were Muslim, you could say that. And he said what she was saying was wrong, no matter who she was saying it to. It was an interesting piece because it takes us out of the realm of trying to pass off guilt and blame and things to someone else and recognizing that maybe there's a bigger something. I don't know about you, but I absolutely love St. Peter. Of all of the characters in the Bible, if I had to be one, I would be Peter. Mainly because Peter blows it consistently. And I'm really good at that. He tries so hard. We have all these wonderful stories of St. Peter trying so hard to get it right and missing. And Jesus keeps loving him and keeps forgiving him and keeps saying, it's okay, Peter, hang in there. You'll get it. The story we read today is such a good one. Peter undoubtedly knows the Hebrew law that said you should forgive somebody 3 times, which is a very generous and compassionate law. Most other cultures, you forgave somebody once. If they blew it again, they were out. Hebrew law said not once, not twice, 3 times you must forgive someone. Because they felt you could be mistaken in your understanding. They could have been mistaken in what they did. You know, sometimes someone does something bad, but they do it by accident without any malicious intent. Or you might have heard false information about them. And so they said, you need to forgive someone 3 times for 3 offenses. So Peter's been hanging around with Jesus for a while. He's been catching on to this thing where Jesus takes the law and stretches it a little wider to be a little more inclusive, right? So Peter, not to be outdone, says, I got this one. Jesus is going to be so impressed. So Jesus, I've been thinking about this forgiveness thing, and I should probably forgive somebody not 3 times, but 7 times, right? I mean, that's a big number. That's more than twice as much as the law says. And Jesus said, no, Peter, not 7 times, 70 times, 7 times. You'll whip out your calculators on your phones, right, to figure out, okay, that's 490. Except Jesus is not saying, keep a little list on each person. You know, you can keep it on your phone. And when you get up to 490, oh goody, just wait for one more mistake and you can blast them. It's not about that. 490 is a humongous number. It's Jesus' way of saying, you know, we're not counting. This forgiveness thing, it's not about counting. It's not about keeping track. It's about letting go. It's about letting go of other people's stuff, to use a polite word, and our own stuff. It's interesting, almost 100 years ago now, when they were founding Alcoholics Anonymous, they discovered that there were a number of principles that if they held on to them, they helped keep one another sober. And a lot of 12-step groups have cropped up over the years. Excuse me. Linda, is there a bottle of water hiding over there under the offering thing? Sometimes there is. Yes. Oh, good. I can talk for another hour now. She's running away in the other direction. Thank you. So the folks founding Alcoholics Anonymous discovered that when people were racked with guilt, they wallowed in addiction. When they were racked with guilt, they couldn't get out of addiction. So they thought, okay, if people make amends, is the term that they used in Alcoholics Anonymous, if people make amends, if people apologize for all the things they've done wrong, maybe they won't feel guilty, and maybe they won't feel stuck in addiction. So part of the 12-step process is you make a list of everything you've ever done wrong in your life. I'm hunching for some of us. This could take a while, but you do that. You make a list of all the things you've done wrong, all the people that you've hurt, and then you apologize to them. And they're very clear that these are not apologies with conditions, right? We're really good at the apology of, I am so sorry I hurt you. But when you think of the things that you said to me, it's no wonder, right? You know, that is not an apology. That doesn't count for much at all. I said, no, you've got to apologize by saying, I'm sorry, I hurt you. It was wrong. Full stop. And they discovered through very unscientific practice that this seemed to work. Well, you know, we live in a world where we have to prove things scientifically or they're of absolutely no value, right? I say that facetiously. So a big study was just done a couple of years ago about addiction. And it was done by a group of people who thought this whole 12-step thing is cute and it's nice and it helps some people, but, you know, there've got to be far better ways to deal with things. And they did this massive study. And you know what they discovered? They discovered that the biggest thing that keeps people in addiction is guilt. And if people apologize for what they've done wrong, they don't feel compelled into whatever addiction they were in. Oh yeah, we've discovered that about 100 years ago. But isn't that interesting? That when we don't find the ability to say that we're sorry, to ask for forgiveness, it harms us in all sorts of different ways. We may not receive the forgiveness, and 12-step groups often talk about that. People may not forgive you, but that's okay. You've said what you've done wrong. You've made your amends, and that will free you up to move on. See, forgiveness isn't just about making someone else feel better. When we think of it that way, it's real easy to hold it back, right? I'm still really ticked off with you, so I'm not going to forgive you, and that way I'm allowed to stay ticked off. Except it keeps me having to keep score. And it forces me to have to carry around all this anger. It's not always easy. There's that wonderful Aesop's fable, right, about the farmer and the snake. The snake bit this farmer's son, and the son died. So the farmer got angry and took an axe and chopped off the snake's tail. Just as an aside, I don't think snakes really have tails, but that's what the story said. So he chopped off part of the snake anyway. And then the farmer and the snake kind of looked at each other and thought, okay, this is dumb. We've got to stop this. We're going to keep getting revenge. This is not healthy. So they talked to each other. I didn't realize snakes could talk either. But anyway, the farmer and the snake talked to each other, and the snake said, you know, we can forgive each other and stop this, but I'm never going to forget the loss of my tail, and you're never going to forget the loss of your son. Sometimes forgiveness is not about forgetting, and sometimes we can't forget. But Jesus invites us into something different. Jesus invites us into living in a state of God's grace. And grace is a very wishy-washy thing. That's good. Grace is a wishy-washy thing where God basically says to us, we're going to try and work out ways to get along. And that means that we're going to try and forgive each other, or at least we're going to work towards that. We're not going to stop at the, I'm never forgiving you, because that shuts us down as much as it shuts down someone else. Now, I'll give you a little warning. I've discovered in all of my great, humongous, extensive years in ministry that whenever you talk about forgiveness, of all the issues you can talk about, I could stand up here and talk about virtually anything else and it would not get this reaction. But I've found in the past, whenever you talk about forgiveness, on the way out the door, the number of people who will come up to you and say, that was a good sermon. By the way, I can't forgive my cousin Bob, but you understand that, right? Or, what about Hitler? What about Hitler? It's as if somehow we need to justify that we can't forgive. And I don't need that. I don't need anybody here. So, we can talk about the weather or other things. I don't need anyone here to justify to me or to anyone else situations that you can't forgive. That happens to all of us. Forgiveness is about working on it. God's grace is about working towards it. God's grace is about recognizing that I have got to find some ways to move beyond this, because until I do, I'm not going to be complete again. It's not the easiest thing in the world. But then living isn't the easiest thing in the world. And yet it's what God calls us and equips us to do. Thanks be to God.